Mark was a traveler, not the kind who moved between cities on Earth, but the kind who crossed the stars. He had been moving from one planet to another for many years, working as an explorer for a small company that searched for rare minerals and ancient ruins. He did not have a crew with him this time. His ship, the Silver Path, was small and could only carry one person with limited supplies. Mark liked it this way. Silence did not scare him. He had grown used to it. The planet he had chosen this time was a quiet world far from the normal trade routes. His company's scanners had shown strange energy signatures under its rocky surface, and Mark had been sent to investigate. From space, the planet looked gray with patches of green and white. Thick forests covered one side, mountains rose like dark teeth on the other, and icy plains stretched near the poles. It was not a friendly world, but Mark was not searching for comfort. He wanted answers. When his ship landed on a flat stretch of stone near the mountains, he felt the ground tremble as if the planet itself was uneasy with his arrival. Mark stepped outside wearing a thin breathing mask. The air was not poisonous, but it was heavy and strange, with a sharp taste like metal. He walked toward the mountains carrying a scanner that beeped softly when it caught signals of unusual minerals. The deeper he went, the stronger the readings became. His steps led him into a narrow pass where tall cliffs blocked the sun. Shadows stretched across the stone, and only a pale glow from the sky above gave him light. His scanner made a sharp sound. Something powerful was hidden nearby. Mark noticed an opening at the base of one cliff. It was not natural. The edges of the stone were smooth and curved inward like an entrance built by hands, not by nature. Dust and vines covered it, but there was no doubt it was a doorway. He placed his palm against the surface. It was cold and hummed with energy. The door opened with a low sound and stale air rushed out. Mark raised his light and stepped inside. The tunnel was narrow at first, then it opened into a chamber that looked as if it had been waiting for someone to enter for centuries. Strange carvings covered the walls, lines, shapes, and symbols that told stories in a language he could not read. Some showed tall figures with long limbs and crowns shaped like flames. Others showed battles, cities, and creatures with wings. Mark felt awe. He had seen ruins on other planets, but something about this place felt alive, as if the past had not left. His eyes followed the carvings until they stopped at the far side of the chamber, where he noticed a figure sitting against the wall. At first, he thought it was a statue. The figure was thin, covered in pale cloth, and bound by chains that glowed faintly. But when his light touched her face, her eyes opened slowly. They were silver like liquid metal, and they watched him with both caution and surprise. Mark froze. This was no statue. This was a living being. She tried to speak, but her voice was rough, unused for a long time. "Who comes here?" she whispered. Mark stepped closer, careful not to make sudden movements. "My name is Mark. I am a traveler. I did not know anyone was here." "Who are you?" She lowered her head. "I was once someone. Now I am nothing. Forgotten." Mark looked at the glowing chains that bound her arms and legs. They were not ordinary metal. They pulsed with faint energy, the same kind he had seen on the walls. Whoever had put her here had wanted her trapped forever. He crouched down. "You are not nothing. You are alive. Tell me your name." Her lips trembled. She shook her head. "I cannot. It was taken from me. My sister erased it. She made the world believe I never existed, even I can barely remember it." Mark felt a wave of sadness. He could not imagine what it meant to lose even a name. "Your sister? Who is she?" The woman lifted her eyes, and for a moment he saw pain mixed with fire. "She is the queen, ruler of this world and many beyond. She feared me. She feared that I could outshine her. So she stripped me of my name and left me here, buried in stone. To the people I am a ghost, a tale not worth speaking." Mark's mind raced. He had heard stories of powerful alien empires, but he had never thought he would meet someone from their ruling line. And not just anyone, but the forgotten sister of a queen. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the faint hum of the chains. Mark felt the weight of her loneliness. She must have been here for centuries, perhaps longer. How could anyone endure such endless isolation? He finally said, "If the world has forgotten you, then I will not. I may not know your name, but I will see you as someone, not nothing." For the first time, her expression softened. A faint spark lit in her silver eyes. "Why would a human care?" "Because names matter," Mark answered simply. "Because no one deserves to be left without one." She studied him, searching for lies, but she found none. Humans were often seen as weak by other races, but Mark's voice carried a strength that came not from power, but from kindness. Mark turned his light toward the carvings on the wall. Among them he saw repeated symbols, always near the image of a woman with a crown lower than the queen's. The symbols looked like fragments of sound. He touched them gently. "Are these your name?" Her gaze followed his hand. For a long time she said nothing, but then she nodded slowly. "Pieces of it. I see them, but I cannot hold them in my memory. They fade when I try." Mark whispered the symbols aloud, trying to form sounds from them. His voice echoed through the chamber. At each attempt, the chains flickered faintly, as if they recognized the call of something lost. The woman's hands trembled. Tears filled her eyes, not of weakness but of recognition. "Yes, and that sound, it feels like me," Mark smiled. "Then we will find it. We will bring it back." In that moment, something shifted. The chamber no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like the first step of a long journey. The woman leaned back against the wall, breathing deeply as if life had just returned to her after years of silence. "Human, Mark, you should not be here. If my sister learns I am awake, she will send her hunters. You will be in danger." Mark shook his head. "Then we will face it. Together. You are not forgotten anymore." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in centuries a smile touched her lips. It was faint, fragile, but real. In the cold silence of the mountain chamber where chains hummed and ancient carvings told half-broken stories, a new bond began. One human, one forgotten sister. One with no name and one determined to give it back. The lost one had been found. The chamber felt different the next day. The air was still heavy and cold, but Mark sensed a new kind of life stirring inside it. The woman who had once looked like a shadow was now sitting straighter, her silver eyes brighter than before. The glow in the chain still pulsed softly, but it seemed weaker, as if her spirit had begun to push back against the bindings. Mark had spent most of the night walking along the walls, tracing the carvings with his fingers. Each mark told a fragment of a story. He had tried repeating the sounds carved into the stone, hoping they could help her remember her true name. His voice had grown rough from speaking again and again, but he did not stop. Names mattered. He wanted her to believe that. The woman watched him, silent at first. She had not spoken much since telling him about her sister. But now, when his voice echoed again with a broken piece of sound, she lifted her head and whispered, "Say it once more." Mark repeated the sound carefully, letting each syllable fall clear and slow. Her breath caught. She placed a chained hand against her chest as if something deep inside her stirred. "It feels like part of me. Not the whole, but a piece that was hidden." Mark nodded. "Then it belongs to you. Even if it is just one piece, it is a beginning." She looked at him with wonder, as though surprised that a human could carry such patience. "Do you not fear me? If my chains break, I do not know what power will return. I was not weak before my sister bound me." Mark shrugged. "Fear, maybe a little. But I see you are more than your power. You were wronged, and no one should live without their own name." For a moment her eyes softened again. "You are strange, human. Most who hear of the queen bow their heads or run. Yet you stand before her sister without trembling." Mark gave a small smile. "Maybe that is because I know what it feels like to be overlooked. I come from a small place, forgotten by most, so when I see someone erased, I cannot turn away." She closed her eyes as though his words touched something buried in her. A faint warmth spread across her pale face. The chains hummed louder, then fell quiet again. Mark spent the morning exploring deeper into the chamber. He found narrow tunnels leading to smaller rooms filled with carvings, broken artifacts, and shattered crystals that once glowed with light. Some of the carvings showed two women side by side. One wore a tall crown shaped like fire, the queen. The other wore a smaller crown, her eyes carved bright and full of life. The resemblance to the woman chained in the main hall was clear. She had once been loved, remembered, honored. Mark returned and told her what he had seen. She listened, her expression a mix of pain and longing. "Yes, I recall those days. The people once cheered for me as they did for her. But she feared that their love for me would grow, so she cast me down, and I became nothing." Mark touched the carvings again, repeating the broken sounds carved beside the image of the second sister. Each time he spoke, her chains flickered as though they were losing strength. The woman whispered, If I could hold on to those sounds, perhaps I could find myself again. Mark leaned closer. Then let us try. Close your eyes. Listen, not with fear, but with hope. Your name is still here. It is waiting for you. She obeyed. Mark repeated the sounds slowly, carefully, each one drawn from the walls around them. The chamber echoed with his voice. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the chain shivered, and a faint glow rose from her skin, soft like moonlight. Her lips parted as though the memory fought its way back. Yes, I hear it. The echo of who I was. It is faint, but it is mine. Mark smiled. That is your awakening. Her silver eyes opened again, shining brighter than before. Awakening. Yes, that word is true. I feel strength I thought was lost. The air in the chamber grew warmer. The hum of the chains weakened. Mark realized that by reminding her of her name, even in fragments, he had begun to restore her power. But power drew danger. He knew it even before the ground trembled faintly beneath them. Somewhere above, something had stirred. The woman heard it too. Her eyes darkened with worry. She feels me. My sister will know I stir. She has eyes in the sky and ears across the stars. When she senses my awakening, she will send hunters. Mark clenched his fists. Then we must be ready. I will not leave you here, not now. She looked at him with disbelief. You would stand against hunters sent by the Queen? They are strong. They are cruel. They are trained to silence any threat to her throne. Mark's jaw tightened. I am not trained like them, but I am not afraid to fight for what is right. If they come, we will face them together. Her gaze lingered on him. She had expected fear, but instead she found resolve. For the first time in centuries, she was not alone. That thought filled her with a strength deeper than chains. The rest of the day, Mark worked to weaken the bindings. He studied the symbols carved into them, searching for a way to undo the lock. He was no master of alien technology, but he was clever with machines. He noticed that each chain was connected to a crystal embedded in the stone floor. The crystals glowed when he spoke her name fragments as though they responded to the sound of her identity. He tested his theory. He repeated the sounds louder, one by one, until the crystals dimmed for a moment. The chains slackened slightly before returning to their strength. The woman gasped softly. Yes, that is the key. My name itself holds the power to break these chains. If I can remember it fully, they will fall. Mark nodded. Then we must continue. Every day, every hour, we will call your name until it returns. She almost laughed, though her voice cracked with the weight of long silence. You are stubborn, human. But perhaps stubbornness is what I needed most. They continued into the night. Mark's throat grew raw, but he refused to stop. She closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her, holding on to each piece like a treasure. Slowly, the fragments joined together, forming a clearer shape in her memory. At last she whispered, I think I know the beginning. My name, and it began with Lee. Yes, Lee. Her voice trembled as the sound touched something deep within her. The chains flared, then flickered weakly. The glow dimmed to a faint spark. For the first time, the weight of her prison had truly weakened. Mark smiled through his exhaustion. Then we are close. Lee, that is the start. We will find the rest. Tears slid down her face, though she tried to hide them. For so long I thought I would vanish, never to be remembered. Yet you, a stranger from another world, have given me the first step back to who I am. Mark looked at her with quiet strength. You were never nothing. You are someone, and soon the world will know it again. Above them, the mountain groaned with distant tremors. The Queen's hunters were not yet there, but their arrival felt certain. The air carried the promise of conflict, but within the chamber something greater stirred. A forgotten sister had begun to awaken, and with her awakening came hope. The night ended with silence, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence of waiting, of preparing for the storm to come. The woman, no longer nameless, no longer a shadow, held onto the fragment of herself she had reclaimed. Lee. That sound was hers, and with Mark's voice beside her, she knew the rest of her name would soon return. The morning sun broke across the mountain peaks, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Mark and Lee had spent the night planning their next steps. The chamber was quiet, yet tension lingered like a weight pressing against their shoulders. Lee had awakened more of her memory, and the chains that bound her were weaker now. But Mark knew their time was limited. The Queen would sense her return soon, and when she did, she would send hunters, deadly and relentless. Lee rose from her place near the wall, her silver eyes reflecting determination. "I can feel it," she said quietly. "My sister will know I am here. The hunters will come. We cannot remain in this mountain." Mark nodded, checking the supplies in his pack. "We will move. There is a forest to the east, dense and wide. It may hide us from their sensors for a time." They left the chamber carefully, stepping over the broken stones and avoiding the carved tunnels. Outside, the air was sharp with cold, but the light of the day gave them energy. Lai walked with strength now, her movements fluid and confident. She had been trapped for centuries, yet she seemed to remember her own grace. As they descended the narrow mountain path, Mark noticed the faint shimmer in the sky. It was almost imperceptible, like a ripple across the blue. He squinted and realized it was not a cloud or sunlight. Sensors on his suit confirmed it, a signal. The Queen had already begun her search. Lee's eyes narrowed. "They are faster than I expected. The hunters are already near. We must move quickly." Mark adjusted his pack. "Then we will run faster." The forest ahead was dense with towering trees whose trunks glowed faintly under the alien sun. The underbrush was thick, but it was their best chance for concealment. As they entered, the forest seemed alive. Strange creatures scuttled through the shadows, and Mark noticed plants that pulsed with soft light, almost like they were watching the travelers. Lee paused. "This forest, I remember it. Long ago, my sister and I used to walk here. It was a place of peace before fear and power stole it from me." Mark glanced at her. "Then we are walking through your memory. Maybe it will help you regain the rest of your name." She nodded, though her face was serious. "Perhaps, but it is dangerous. These woods hide more than just memories. Hunters will find their way here." They moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows, using fallen branches and foliage to mask their presence. Lee's senses were sharp. She could feel disturbances in the air, hear the faintest footsteps or the softest vibrations in the ground. Mark followed her lead, trusting her instincts more than his scanners. Hours passed. They moved deeper into the forest, and Mark noticed Lee growing stronger. Her chains no longer held her in place. They were like threads of light now, weak and flickering. She reached toward the symbols he had used to help her remember her name. "Lika," the next sound. "Perhaps it is Ra." Mark repeated it slowly. "Lee," her eyes glimmered brighter than ever. "Yes, that is right. A piece is returning, my memory. It flows like water again." As she spoke, the forest around them seemed to respond. Light from the trees shimmered, and the ground underfoot felt alive. Mark realized the energy of the planet itself resonated with her presence. She was not just any alien. She was part of this world's life force. Suddenly, a sharp sound cut through the forest, a high-pitched alarm, unnatural and precise. Mark stopped immediately. "They are here." Lee's eyes narrowed. "Yes, the hunters. They have found our trail." The first of them appeared through the trees. Tall, armored figures, their eyes glowing faintly, scanned the forest. Each carried weapons that hummed with energy. Their movements were swift, coordinated, and deadly. Mark's heart raced, but he stood firm. Lee's hand touched his shoulder. "Do not be afraid," she said calmly. "We can outrun them, and if we must, we can fight." Mark nodded. He had faced danger before, but nothing like this. These were trained killers, sent by a queen who feared her own sister's power. Yet he trusted Lee. She had begun to remember herself, and her strength was returning. The hunters advanced, and the forest seemed to close around them. Branches scratched their faces, and roots tried to trip their feet. But Lee moved like water, graceful and precise. Mark followed, leaping over obstacles and keeping pace with her. As they ran, Mark noticed small symbols etched into some trees, ancient marks left by Lee's people long ago. Lee touched them lightly as they passed. "These are old wards," she whispered. "They can hide our trail if I focus." She closed her eyes for a moment, and a soft glow spread from her hands into the forest. The trees around them shimmered and shifted, creating false paths that would confuse the hunters. Mark watched in awe. Her power was growing with every memory she reclaimed, and every step brought her closer to who she once had been. The hunters pressed forward, but they slowed, uncertain. "They are clever," one said through a communicator, voice mechanical and sharp. "But they cannot hide forever. She is ours to bring back or to destroy." Mark realized then that this chase would not end in hiding. They would have to confront them. But for now, the forest gave them cover, and Lee's memory offered hope. Hours turned into the alien night, and the hunters finally lost their trail temporarily. Mark and Lee found a small clearing by a stream. The water reflected the alien sky, streaked with colors unfamiliar to Mark. Lee knelt by the water and cupped her hands to drink. Mark watched her. "We need rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be harder. The hunters will not give up." She nodded, her gaze distant. "I know, but I feel alive. My memory is coming back. My strength returns. I am no longer just the forgotten sister. Soon I will be who I was meant to be." Mark crouched beside her. "And I will help you. We will face whatever comes together." Lee turned to him, a small smile breaking through the seriousness. "You are human, yet you see me as I am, not as a threat or a prisoner." "That is rare," Mark shrugged. "Perhaps we both need each other. You need your name, and I need to believe that even in a cruel universe, people can do the right thing." She placed her hand over his. The contact was brief, but it carried trust, something Mark realized she had not given anyone for centuries. Night deepened, and the forest seemed to whisper around them. Strange creatures of the dark watched silently, their eyes reflecting starlight. Mark felt uneasy, but Lee reassured him. "They do not intend to harm us. They are witnesses, not enemies. Your courage has earned their respect." Mark laughed softly. "Witnesses or not, I still prefer to keep my distance from predators." She smiled, a faint but real smile. "Then tomorrow we run again, but perhaps we will be ready to face them. The hunters cannot anticipate the strength of a sister who remembers her name." Mark nodded, staring at the alien sky. Stars stretched across the horizon in colors he had never seen. Somewhere out there, the Queen's hunters moved like shadows, but for now they had a moment of peace. Lee closed her eyes, letting the fragment of her name repeat in her mind. Lee. The syllables were stronger now, more certain, and the chains on her wrists pulsed once and then became almost invisible. The next step would be harder, but she was ready. Mark watched her, feeling a mix of admiration and determination. He realized that this journey was bigger than any minerals or ancient ruins he had sought before. This was about restoring someone's identity, someone who had been erased by fear and power, and he had the privilege of helping her reclaim herself. The first night in the forest passed quietly. Mark kept watch while Lee slept lightly, her body alert even in rest. Every sound made her flicker awake, but each time she looked at Mark, she felt safer. For the first time in centuries, she knew she was not alone in this universe. By dawn, the hunters were still missing, but their presence was felt like a shadow creeping along the horizon. Mark packed their supplies, checking his tools and weapons. Lee moved with quiet precision, testing her regained strength. She lifted small boulders, stretched her arms, and felt energy flowing through her body again. "This is the moment," she said softly. "Tomorrow we may have to fight, or we may have to run faster than ever before. Either way, I am ready. My name is returning, and with it my power." Mark placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And I will be beside you. We face them together. You are not forgotten. You are remembered." Lee's eyes glimmered with hope. The pursuit was not over. The Queen's hunters would come. But the lost sister was awakening, and with her a force the universe had long forgotten, and for the first time in centuries, she felt truly alive. The forest at dawn was quiet, almost too quiet. Mark and Lee moved carefully through the thick undergrowth, each step deliberate. The night had been restless. Lee had barely slept, her mind filled with memories returning in fragments. The hunters were still out there, closing in with every hour. Mark's senses were sharp, and he could feel the tension in the air like static before a storm. Lee paused beside a large tree, her silver eyes scanning the horizon. "They are close," she said softly. "I can feel them moving. My sister will not send them far. She wants me returned quickly." Mark nodded. "Then we must choose our place. We cannot run forever." Lee studied the trees, the uneven ground, and the open areas. Finally, she pointed to a narrow canyon nearby. "Here, the walls will protect us and we can control the path. They cannot surround us completely." They moved quickly, positioning themselves in the rocky canyon. The walls were high, casting long shadows, and the narrow path left only one entrance. It was a trap for whoever entered, but it was also a trap for them if the hunters used brute force. Mark set up small devices along the edges, sensors and alarms, to alert them if anyone approached. Lee touched the rocks beside her, feeling the energy flow. "This place is strong. The stones remember my bloodline. They will give me strength." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Your bloodline? I thought only your name mattered." She smiled faintly. Both matter. My name carries memory, but my bloodline carries power. They are linked. I am not just Lee, I am more. Soon they will see that. The sun rose higher, casting light into the canyon. The wind carried a scent of metal and strange minerals. The air charged with energy. Mark felt it too. The hunters were approaching, moving silently but efficiently, as if they had already anticipated their path. Then the first shadow appeared at the mouth of the canyon. Mark's sensors beeped. 10 figures, tall and armored, their weapons glowing softly, stepped into the light. Each one scanned the area carefully. Lee stood tall, chains now almost invisible on her wrists. Her voice was calm but carried authority. They come for me, she said. Let them come. Mark tightened his grip on a small energy blaster. He was not as strong as the hunters, but he had skill and courage. He would not flee. Not now. The hunters advanced, but the canyon narrowed their movement. Lise raised her hands and a soft glow spread along her arms, flowing like light through the air. The rocks around them hummed, responding to her presence. The hunters paused. They were trained to fight physical threats, not the power of one who had been erased yet returned stronger than expected. Lee's eyes locked on the first hunter. You will not take me back. I am not yours to command. My name is mine, and I will not be silenced again. The hunter raised a weapon. A beam of energy shot toward her, but she moved gracefully, the light around her absorbing and deflecting it. The other hunters fired in coordination, beams crisscrossing the canyon, but each time Lee's power bent the energy, guiding it harmlessly into the rocks. Mark ducked behind a boulder, firing at hunters who approached from the shadows. He was precise, hitting sensors and disabling some of their tracking devices. Though he lacked strength compared to them, his tactics slowed their advance. Lee moved among the rocks, each step leaving a faint glow. She began speaking fragments of her name aloud, pieces she had remembered. Lie. Help. The chains on her wrists flickered with every sound, almost invisible now. Each syllable made her stronger, and the energy of the canyon responded. Rocks lifted slightly, forming barriers that blocked the hunter's path. The battle continued, hunters pressing forward, yet every attack was met with calculated resistance. Lee's power was not just strength. It was control, precision, and memory returning in full force. The canyon became a maze of light and energy, confusing the hunters. One hunter broke from the group, rushing toward Lee directly. Mark jumped in, firing at the figure to slow him down. Lee turned her gaze, and a wave of energy burst from her hands, throwing the hunter backward without touching him physically. The others froze. Do not test me, Lee shouted. I am not the forgotten one anymore. The hunters hesitated, realizing this was no ordinary prisoner. This was a force of nature, awakened by the one who had remembered herself. Mark felt awe as he watched her, understanding that her return was more than just regaining a name. It was reclaiming an identity that had been stolen, a strength that had been denied, and a spirit that could not be broken. The canyon walls resonated with Lee's energy. Rocks shifted and rose slightly, forming natural barriers and channels. The hunters were forced into narrow paths, unable to surround them. Mark and Lee moved with careful coordination, each anticipating the other's needs. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, casting harsh light, yet the hunters did not retreat. They were relentless. But Lee's power grew with each moment, each syllable of her name, each memory recalled. She had begun to remember her childhood walks through forests, her lessons in strategy and wisdom, her laughter before fear and exile. All of it strengthened her. Mark glanced at her, admiration clear in his eyes. You are more than they expected, he said. She gave a small nod. And I will be more than they fear. Suddenly, a loud sound came from the top of the canyon. The ground trembled as another group of hunters descended from above, attempting to trap them completely. Lee turned her gaze upward. They want to corner us, she said. But I will not be trapped. Not again. She lifted both hands, and the stones along the canyon walls glowed. Energy surged outward, forming a protective barrier around them. The descending hunters slammed into the energy, slowed and stumbled. Mark used the moment to move, disabling several with his blaster and leading them toward paths Lee had cleared. The battle was not over, but the tide had shifted. Lee's awakening, the return of her name and her regained strength had turned what seemed a desperate flight into a stand. Mark crouched beside her. You are incredible, he said. I never imagined—" She smiled faintly, interrupting him. "I am more than incredible. I am myself again. And soon I will have all of my name, all of my memory. Then nothing will stop me." The hunters regrouped, more cautious now. They were skilled, but they had not anticipated a sister restored, a human who would not flee, and the combination of both. Lee's chains finally vanished completely. She felt the full weight of her power, her memory, and her name returning. "So, the rest is coming," she whispered. Her voice carried authority, strength, and the certainty of someone who had survived centuries of erasure. Mark watched her, feeling hope swell in his chest. Together they had turned the pursuit into a stand. Together they had shown that courage, identity, and humanity itself could face overwhelming power. The hunters knew they could not win in the canyon without a new strategy. Slowly they retreated, regrouping at a distance. Lee's gaze followed them. "This is not the end. They will return. My sister will come herself if I continue to evade them." Mark nodded. "Then we prepare. We cannot let her catch us off guard." Lee touched the rocks beside her. "This place has given me strength. I am ready for whatever comes next. My name, my memory, my power, they are mine, and I will not give them back." The canyon fell silent after the hunters withdrew. Mark and Lee moved to higher ground, overlooking the forest and mountains beyond. The wind carried the faint scent of alien flowers and minerals, but also a warning of more challenges ahead. Lee closed her eyes, letting the full sound of her name echo in her mind. Lee. So each syllable a step toward her complete identity. She was no longer the forgotten sister. She was Lee, whole and remembered, standing against the hunters, against her sister's fear, against erasure itself. Mark stood beside her, feeling the weight and importance of what they had achieved. This was not a victory over life or death alone. This was a victory of identity, of courage, and of humanity reaching beyond its small beginnings to restore what was lost. The forest around them seemed to hum in quiet agreement. Lee had taken a stand, and for the first time in centuries she knew she would not fall. The hunters would return, yes. The Queen would not let this go. But Lee was no longer the sister who had been hidden, silenced, and erased. She was a force awakened, a name restored, and a power remembered. Mark looked at her with pride and resolve. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he said. Lee turned to him, silver eyes bright, voice steady. "Together," she confirmed. The stand had been made. The pursuit had led them to a moment of power, preparation, and truth. And now the lost sister was no longer lost. She was Lee, and the world would remember her. The ruined world lay quiet after the storm of battle. Smoke rose from broken machines and shattered walls. The ground carried the marks of burned metal and the cracks of falling stone. In the center of the field stood Moran, his clothes torn and his hands covered in dust. Beside him stood the forgotten sister, her tall figure still trembling from the effort of fighting, but her eyes brighter than before. For the first time in her life, she had stood against the Queen. She had not hidden. She had not obeyed. She had chosen. The soldiers who had come to capture her were now scattered. Some had fled back to their ships. Others had thrown down their weapons, unwilling to fight against the woman they once believed did not exist. They had followed the Queen for power, but now they had seen something different. Someone who carried no throne yet stood with courage. The sister looked at the silent field. "They do not fight anymore," she said softly. Her voice was still uneven, but stronger than before. Moran nodded. "They have seen enough. They know you are not a shadow. You are real." The words touched her heart, though she still felt the heavy weight of doubt. All her life, or what little she remembered of it, had been filled with silence. She had been locked away, erased from her people's memory. To think she could stand in the open, seen by others, felt strange. The sky cracked with thunder. Above, the Queen's warship began to pull away, its engines burning like falling stars. A message echoed across the air, her sister's voice sharp and filled with fury. "This is not the end. You are nothing without me. You are weak, and the galaxy will forget you again." The sister closed her eyes. The words struck deep, for they were the same words she had lived under for so long. But then she opened them again, and this time she did not bow her head. "No," she whispered, and her voice grew louder. "I am not nothing." Moran stepped closer, his gaze steady. "What is your name?" he asked gently. The question made her heart race. Her name had been taken, buried, left to rot in silence. She had been called nothing, forgotten even by history. For a moment fear rose again, fear that the name would not come, that she would remain empty. But then, as the wind moved through the ruins, memory stirred. A small light inside her mind, faint yet real, carried the sound of her name. She remembered her mother speaking it when she was young. Before her sister grew powerful, before jealousy and betrayal, she remembered the warmth of that sound, the way it felt like belonging. She took a deep breath and spoke it. I am Anara. The name carried across the battlefield, simple yet strong. The soldiers who had remained lifted their heads hearing it. Miran smiled, his eyes shining with pride. That is your name, he said. It is yours, not hers. It belongs to you. Anara felt as though the chains of centuries had fallen away. She was no longer the forgotten sister. She was herself again. The Queen's ship vanished into the darkness of space, leaving the world behind. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of wind moving through the ruined towers. Miran looked at her and asked, "What will you do now?" Anara turned her gaze to the horizon. For so long her life had been only survival, waiting, hiding. Now she was free to choose. She thought of her people who had been told lies, who had been taught to fear and obey. She thought of the soldiers who had seen her stand and had laid down their weapons. I will not rule them, she said. I do not want a throne, but I will show them that there is another path. They should know they are more than tools of war. They should know they have a choice too. Miran nodded. That is a good path. She looked at him then, her voice softer. And you, Miran? Will you return to your people? He smiled faintly, brushing dust from his hands. Perhaps one day. But for now I will walk with you. You should not face this alone. The words warmed her in a way she did not expect. She had lived so long in silence that the thought of someone choosing to stay beside her felt like a gift greater than power. Together they began to move through the ruins. The broken machines were quiet now, and the stars above grew brighter as the smoke cleared. Along the way they passed soldiers who had once chased them. Now those same soldiers bowed their heads not in fear but in respect. Anara paused, uncertain how to answer their looks. She had never been a leader, never been seen as anything but forgotten. But Miran whispered, "They are waiting for your voice." She stood straighter. Her body was still weak, but her spirit felt stronger. She looked at the group of soldiers and spoke clearly. I am Anara. I was hidden, but I am not gone. I do not ask you to kneel. I ask you to rise. You have the right to choose who you are. You are not only servants of war. The soldiers listened in silence. Some looked confused, others thoughtful, and a few even hopeful. For them, this was the first time someone of their kind had spoken words of freedom instead of command. As they continued their path, more soldiers appeared, drawn by the news that the forgotten sister had returned. Each time she spoke, her voice grew steadier, and each time Miran watched with quiet pride. Days passed as they traveled from one ruined city to another. Everywhere they went, Anara spoke her name, and each time it became stronger. She felt the old wounds inside her healing. One evening, as the sun set over the cracked mountains, she and Miran sat together near the remains of an ancient tower. The light painted the sky in gold and red, and for the first time in many years, Anara felt peace. I thought I would always be empty, she said, but you gave me back my name. You gave me back myself. Miran shook his head. I only reminded you. The strength was always yours. She smiled faintly, the expression soft but real. Then I will not forget it again. Far above, stars filled the night sky. The Queen was still out there, her anger burning across the galaxy. But Anara no longer feared her. She had her name, her voice, and her choice. That was greater than any throne. Together, she and Miran prepared to leave the ruined world. Their ship was damaged, but it would fly again. As they walked up the ramp, Anara looked back one last time at the place where she had awakened. I was a shadow once, she whispered. Now I am Anara. Miran placed a hand on her shoulder. And the galaxy will know it. With that, the ship rose from the broken ground and climbed into the stars. The ruins faded below them, and the endless night stretched ahead. For the first time in centuries, Anara's path was her own. She was no longer forgotten. She was free.